Closed captioning of this program is made possible by the Fireman's Fund Foundation.
He changed his mind. This week, our news panel reviews bills signed by the governor on education, labor, and gay rights. It's been 20 years since the Loma Prieta earthquake, but the long struggle to rebuild the Bay Bridge continues. And how do Californians feel about their state and their country? Coming up next. Good evening, I'm Belva Davis, and welcome to This Week in Northern California. First, we thank you for your feedback on our new look and our format. We invite you to continue to comment on our work in progress. Now, some of the headlines from the news this week. President Obama wrapped up an overnight trip to San Francisco this morning following a night of fundraising and demonstrators. About 1,000 people filled Union Square to cheer and express their discontent with his administration. The Senate Finance Committee approved a health care bill without a public or government-funded option and gained the support of one Republican, Olympia Snowe from Maine. There were cheers on Wall Street when the stock market hit 10,000 for the first time in a year. But in San Francisco, unemployment reached a new high in August at 10.1%. And today, a Superior Court judge declared the trial of Johannes Meserly would be moved out of Alameda County. The former BART police officer is accused of the New Year's Day shooting of Oscar Grant. Now for our news panel. After threatening to veto 700 bills unless lawmakers make a deal on water, Governor Schwarzenegger signed over 400 bills at the last minute. Jill Tucker, education writer with the San Francisco Chronicle, is here to tell us about some of the bills in education. Scott Schaefer, host of the California Report on KQED Public Radio, reports on those that impact the LGBT community. And labor writer Dick Meister has details on the bills relating to labor. So, Jill Tucker, let's begin with you. What are some of the bills the governor signed that might impact education, that will impact education?
Well, probably the biggest bills that people wwere talking about were the bills that affect this funding coming out of Washington, D.C., the race to the top money. It's $4.35 billion with a B, which is a lot of money, and California wants a big chunk of that. But there were some things in our education code that restricted California's ability to get that. And the one that, especially SB 19, was linking data, test data, with teachers. And the race to the top money from the Obama administration says you need to be able to do that. And there was some debate, and the teachers union was weighing in. The governor called a special session to deal with this issue at the last minute, and they got this bill through, and he signed it. There were a few other bills that dealt with race to the top money because the rest of the bills that were out there for education did not have any money coming to education. So that was definitely a trend in the 65 bills that he signed out of 105 total. Not a lot of money for schools in there.
Okay, so that was not a bill that teachers necessarily would have supported, right?
No, the union was not terribly fond of that. They don't like the idea of linking test data to individual teachers. They think it's a little unfair. And yet they basically could do that anyway. So this tweaking of the education code just makes it very clear that it's possible to do it. Schools were doing it anyway to help the kids. But it was something that now really paves the way for California to compete with that. And Governor Schwarzenegger was adamant that we needed to do this.
Given that there's no money in the state budget for much of anything, are any of these education bills, are they mostly feel-good bills, or might something actually happen in the classroom that's going to make our schools more efficient, perform better?
Well, when you look at a lot of the bills, like any of the bills that we're going to be talking about tonight, a lot of them are tweaking codes where they weren't working somehow or other. He was really focused on a few things. He loves his digital textbooks initiative where I don't know how the kids are actually going to read these necessarily in the classroom for a while unless they all get Kindles, which would cost some money. But he did things like that kind of set the stage for maybe policy in the future. He's fond of charter schools. He did a few things that helps them get buildings more easily. But really, when it came to serious reform, he vetoed a lot of bills that would have led the way for serious reform in California, including education finance. There was one bill that a lot of folks were up in arms that he didn't sign that would created a working group to really take on how we fund schools in California. It's something that people have wanted to do, and no one's taken the initiative. And he was criticized for vetoing something that would have set that in motion. He said it wasn't necessary, we could do it anyway, but he hasn't provided the leadership to get it going.
You know, he still has, what, a year plus left in his term, but already people are talking about his legacy. Arnold Schwarzenegger, I mean, does he have a legacy in education, would you say? And if so, like, how does this session of bills that he signed add to it or take away from it?
Well, I don't think this session necessarily adds to it. He's basically known in the education community for cutting education. And so far, that's his legacy, is an era of serious and dramatic cuts to schools and not really doing anything to backfill that.
Going forward, how are people in the educational community, how are they feeling about the future? I know that the math scores were down. There's even talk that there may be other cuts coming down the road. What's the mood?
The mood is not good because they have had so many cuts. Class sizes are already growing, and we're talking about massive budget shortfalls next year. San Francisco, for example, is talking about a $60 million budget shortfall just in San Francisco, which would mean massive layoffs, larger class sizes, and they're not seeing anything on the radar coming from the governor or the legislature that is going to help them. So the mood is not happy in education, and nothing here. There's, like I said, some tweaking that schools are wanted and that will help them, but nothing that's really going to alleviate the problems.
And going up beyond K through 12, you've got community colleges, UC, the CSU system struggling also. Is there anything coming from in the way of stimulus money that could help, say, the community colleges with retraining people? There's so many people unemployed, losing jobs, trying to transition into some other kind of career. Is any help for them?
Well, I think a lot of people in education, higher ed and K-12 are saying thank goodness for the stimulus because it really has helped them maintain programs like that through the recession, save jobs. They were talking about how many jobs were saved in California, 28,000 plus because of the stimulus money. So yeah, it's really making a difference, but that's going away.
Yeah.
In the bills, though, that the governor did sign in education, there was at least one indication of his new thoughts when he looked at the bills that were of interest to the gay community, because I think the bill concerning the one day that was most important to our local representative, Senator Mark Leno.
Yeah, he had a couple of bills that were signed by the governor this time. One that he vetoed last year, a bill that will set aside a day of recognition for Harvey Milk, the former San Francisco supervisor, the first openly elected gay official in the country. Of course, he was killed in 1979. This is a day of recognition. It's not a holiday, but he joins John Muir, the California Poppy, and teachers as having their own day of recognition in California. I think Harvey would probably get a chuckle out of that pairing, or that those four people, four groups being together. But it's not without controversy. He did veto it last year, he said, because it should be a local celebration here in the Bay Area. But of course, the former actor was convinced by the movie Milk, which got a lot of play nationally, won an Academy Award, and he said that his visibility had been raised by that movie, and that now he was a statewide figure that worthy of this day of recognition.
So the popularity that the public accepted this film as something that was valuable enough to spend their money on might have had a little impact?
Well, that was actually part of his statement. When he signed the bill, he acknowledged that. The other thing he signed, which in some ways, both that bill and this other bill that he signed, SB 54, another Mark Leno bill, which will recognize same-sex marriages performed in other states when these couples moved to California if those marriages were performed before Prop 8 passed. And then couples that get married in states like Massachusetts and move here after Prop 8 passed, those unions will be recognized in the same way with the same level of legal protections as they would have gotten in the states they came from. So it's kind of a backdoor opponents of that would say it's kind of a backdoor undoing of Prop 8.
You know, it was interesting, Scott, because the governor reversed his decision on the Harvey Milk Day, and he's surprised, I think, the LGBT community with these signatures. What's interesting, and I've been seeing it with the Harvey Milk Day already in the education community, is that it's already, these two bills are stirring up a hornet's nest with the opposition, or the Prop 8 people that we had that are still out there. They're already calling for a boycott of Harvey Milk Day, which is not until May. You know, how much backlash has the governor got on this?
Well, you know, this is really a stick in the eye of the base of the Republican Party. I mean, if there was any relationship left between him and the conservatives in the party, this pretty much puts the nail in the coffin. This is a clear signal that I think this is in some ways Arnold Schwarzenegger unplugged. You know, this is really what he's doing now in the final months. He's not running for re-election. He says he's not running for another office. So the things he's doing are, you know, things that he probably believes to be.
Finally seeing the real Arnie.
Well, at least this version of 2009. But you're right, it does stir up a hornet's nest, and you know, it could lead to another ballot measure of some kind. You never know in California what that hostility can lead to.
We're already headed to court. I mean, there has been a case accepted in the court.
There's a case in federal court which is making its way through. The trial is scheduled to begin on January 11th. There were efforts to get it tossed out. That was rejected this week by the judge, Vaughn Walker. And so a lot is happening. They're trying to have Prop 8 thrown out as being unconstitutional with the federal Constitution, equal protection, and so that one is moving along. So all those things really infuriating people. You know, I think the schools were really a big part of the Prop 8 campaign. This concern that gay rights was going to make its way into the schools and be part of the curriculum if gay couples were allowed to marry in California.
And that's why I was thinking it was somewhat ironic that the celebration in the gay community for Harvey Milk Day is actually reinforcing some of those same things within the opposition, and basically bringing those folks together again to solidifying that
it really
once
does.
again.
I mean, to keep in mind, it's only schools are encouraged to have the students talk about Harvey Milk and his legacy. They're not required to do it, but you know, nonetheless.
And they often don't talk about poppies on Poppy Day.
Don't talk about poppies.
So actually, people can choose not to do this. So do you think that there will still be a lawsuit or some other action?
I don't know that there's, I think the action will be along the lines of what Jill is describing, that parents may organize and just, you know, particularly in more conservative parts of the state, have an opt-out sort of option for students and their families, so that they don't have to be required to be in a classroom where they're talking about Harvey Milk and his legacy.
Well, you know, moving to another topic where there were some surprises, labor has not been considered, as with those bills that he had vetoed, the governor had vetoed in prior years, a real friend of Arnold Schwarzenegger, but yet he signed some bills they were interested in this time.
Yes, it was very unusual because he and all the Republicans in Sacramento are not exactly friends of labor, but he did sign some important bills. I mean, workers' compensation, for instance. I think there were 2 or 3 really important bills. A lot of employers, too many of them, cheat their workers by not taking out workers' compensation, not joining the system. So a worker gets hurt on the job, can't work, is supposed to get a benefit, no benefit because the employer wasn't enrolled. So they put in a bill that really tightly regulates, and supposedly is going to stop that. And the other one that's important, I think, is that to get your benefit, you have to be certified, a doctor has to certify this person was hurt on the job and should get this amount of benefit. Well, a lot of employers say, oh yeah, tell their workers, you got hurt, you better go see a doctor and get your benefits. Well, they send them to a company doctor, the employer's doctor, not, and surprise, the employer's doctor somehow says, in a lot of cases, you're asking for too much, Mr. Worker. You know, you weren't really hurt that bad, and I'll certify that you should get a little benefit, but not a lot. And that sort of thing is stopped.
These are things, though, that the labor community has been complaining about for years. I remember, you know, writing about these things several years ago. Why is Schwarzenegger now saying, oh, now is the time to sign these bills? What did he say in his signing messages for saying, oh, now this is important?
No, I don't think he indicated that why it would be at this particular time. Maybe he's always felt that way, and now, as you mentioned in other regard, He's going out and he'll just say, well, I want to do this now.
It basically gets them to follow the law, right?
Yeah, oh yeah, that's really
it's not
what it
like
amounts to.
some big
No, it's not a
new,
great big overhaul, but
Was
it's,
there a signal from Washington that might have made him feel more friendly toward these particular bills, or toward
No,
labor, or what?
no, I don't think so. No.
You don't think so?
No, he's your typical anti-labor Republican. I mean, that's what it amounts to. But he made some exceptions in signing these bills, and he vetoed some bills, though, that should have gone through that would have helped labor, but that's another matter.
Okay. Well, Governor Schwarzenegger speaking out, signing things that he vetoed before, helping education where it didn't cost any money, and giving labor at least enough to send out an email to say he signed our bills. So thank you, Jill, Scott, and Dick. Well, tomorrow marks the 20th anniversary of the Loma Prieta earthquake. Those of us who were here have strong memories and images of the time. We remember the fallen Cypress Freeway and a collapsed section of the Bay Bridge. Tonight, NewsHour correspondent Spencer Michaels reports on the more than 20-year project to seismically retrofit and redesign the bridge.
For years, engineers and politicians have planned and fought over how to fix the earthquake-prone San Francisco Bay Bridge. 280,000 commuters cross the bridge every day, frustrated at how long it's taking to build a new eastern span. When it was constructed in the 1930s, the Bay Bridge was the most expensive structure ever built by man, costing $77 million. And it was an engineering marvel that took just 3 years to build. It opened in 1936 to national acclaim.
A 6-lane double-deck bridge, 8 miles long, spanning the largest major navigable body of water ever bridged.
53 years later, in 1989, the powerful Loma Prieta earthquake, centered 60 miles away, shook the Bay Area, knocking down houses, starting fires, and dramatically rupturing a part of the Bay Bridge near Oakland, swallowing 2 cars, killing 1 motorist, and closing the span to traffic. That came as a shock to officials like Bart Ney, an urban planner and spokesman for the California Department of Transportation, Caltrans.
We did believe that these structures were robust and would be able to withstand massive earthquakes, and we were wrong about that.
The collapse caused fears that another quake, a bigger one, could have devastating effects unless major changes were made. The Bay Bridge was fully up and running within 2 months, but a permanent fix can take a little longer. So far, it's been 20 years. During that time, engineers, local and state officials, the press, and the public studied the bridge and battled over what to do.
When we started this job, we brought forth just a basic concrete viaduct to make this replacement on the east span of the Bay Bridge. We're engineers, A to B sounded good to us, but the community really stepped up and said that they wanted something more at this juncture.
San Franciscans are intoxicated with their area's beauty. With the majestic Golden Gate Bridge just a few miles away and the western span of the Bay Bridge a handsome double-deck suspension structure, local politicians pushed for a brand new eye-catching bridge rather than trying to repair the vulnerable eastern span. Leading the charge was Willie Brown, former legislative leader who was mayor of San Francisco at the time.
You certainly don't want what you have on the eastern side of the span. It's horrible to continuously look at. I don't even know how they got away with building that part of the span so unaesthetically attractive and building the west side of the span so aesthetically attractive.
Steve Heminger, executive director of the Bay Area's Metropolitan Transportation Commission, says the fights were intense.
We fought about the design of the bridge. We fought about whether the bridge should have a bicycle or pedestrian path. We fought about where the bridge should go. We fought about whether there ought to be train tracks on the new bridge.
The fighting brought delays, which, as prices increased, helped raise the cost of the span by billions, partly paid for, after another fight, by increased tolls.
What was originally a limited objective, which was to build a new span that would be seismically strong, grew into a monstrosity where every interest group under the sun tried to glom onto the project and achieve their objective. they all got in the way of getting this project done sooner.
17 years after the earthquake, the state finally opened bids on a costly new design which does not add any increased capacity for the crowded bridge. It does, however, include a soaring tower near the island in the middle of the bay. The new bridge between Oakland and the island will employ a little-used engineering technique to anchor the suspension cables, not into rock or concrete piers, but into the bridge deck itself. That requires construction of expensive temporary bridge decks, which will be torn down in 4 years, says Mark Ketchum, a structural engineer and Caltrans advisor.
One reason it's costing money and taking a long time to build is because we need to build one bridge to carry the temporary weight of the new bridge while it's under construction, and then tear down the first bridge. So from a structural engineering perspective, one can argue we're building two bridges to wind up with one.
According to Willie Brown, the expense and delay in getting to the new design was inevitable. Politically active Bay Area residents pushed for change, but at the state level, reaching consensus on design and costs was difficult.
It's almost impossible at the state level to do what you can do at a city level. At a city level, you actually can say, by this date, we're going to start, and we actually start. At the state level, you've got a state legislative body, you've got the governor, you've got the infrastructure political types made up of Caltrans and others, and they kind of work at their own pace.
No one wants a dictator. No one wants a governor who can say, this is the bridge design, and whether you like it or not, this is what you're going to get. No one wants that. But I don't think anybody in their right mind can argue that 20 years after an earthquake and still being 4 years away from a new bridge is a good result either.
Now that this project is on its way, even most critics agree that the new bridge will be stronger than the old, which was the original bottom line in design.
After a major earthquake, and what we're talking about here is the largest potential earthquake that would happen within 1,500 years, the structure would not only continue to stand, but would serve the public immediately after the quake.
That's if a massive earthquake doesn't hit before the new bridge is finished in 2013, barring unforeseen delays.
Well, you can visit KQED's Loma Prieta special coverage page of kqed.org/Loma Prieta to share your memories and your photos. You will also find other KQED stories on the 20th anniversary with links to archived video footage and local newscasts from 1989, as well as links to information on earthquake preparedness. How do California voters feel about the state of their state? 3 field polls this week reveal they are unhappier than ever with the governor and the legislature and the structure of the state's government. Here to give us some details is Mark DiCamillo, director of the field poll. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
How do people feel about all of these things with an election coming up next year that could be pretty important?
Well, in a word, frustrated. Californians just are really taking it out on their elected officials. They feel the state is moving in the wrong direction. When we measure the state legislature's job rating, it's at an all-time record low. Just 13% of Californians approve of the job the legislature is doing. And for the governor, I mean, this was a governor who was up there in the 65–70% range in terms of approval at one point, and now he's down to 27%. So the mighty have fallen here, and the voters are really taking it out on their elected officials.
Do you think that might have something to do? We've talked a lot about the bills that the governor signed that he normally had vetoed in the past. Do you think it's having an effect? Do the legislators realize how frustrated people are?
Well, I think they might, but there seems little they seem to be able to do to address the problem. I think part of the problem is that voters are being asked to accept all of this pain. That is, they're being asked to accept tax increases. They're being asked to accept cuts to popular programs. Yet they don't they don't believe that the legislature is really doing much to change the culture in Sacramento. It seems to be business as usual. They're not taking any hits. They're still got their cars and their perks. And I think that frustration inside the, the voter's mind is really gnawing at voters and underlying why they're so upset with them.
Well, what about something that we've talked about during our entire adulthood here, changing the structure of government? Is there more of a feeling that maybe now's the time?
Well, we actually did a special poll this week where we looked at these proposals to call for constitutional reform. And in fact, Californians now believe that fundamental changes should be made to the state's constitution. They support that. A majority believes that that should happen. So when we ask them further, well, how should this take place? And they're actually quite intrigued by the idea of a constitutional convention. They would get behind that. But the problem, the rub really is, what is it that the constitutional reforms, what reforms will come out of this? And really, when we start probing the voters' views on what about tax reform, what about changing the 2/3 vote requirements in the legislature, voters recoil at that. They don't really accept those kinds of changes, yet that's where many of the constitutional reform advocates are trying to take this. And I think it's going to be a tough sell for most of the public if that's what the debate is going to be about.
Those are fundamental changes that have to, I mean, that's why we have the situation we do in terms of the vote, getting something out of the legislature, but they don't like the results. But
what they'd like ideally is for the two parties to work together. They think the best kinds of bills are bills that come out of compromise, and they're not seeing that in Washington, and they're not seeing it in Sacramento. So it's really a frustrating situation for voters, and I think they're getting to a point where they're looking for alternatives that they normally wouldn't consider.
Surprisingly to me, looking across the country at the nation, the feeling was?
Oh, it's more positive now. Since the election of Obama, I think there was this pent-up frustration of wanting George Bush out of office. It was a very long period in which voters here were just counting the days. And now that he's out and Obama's in, there was this kind of breath of fresh air. But if you look at the situation, the economy's still in the tank, and health care is problematic. I mean, even for Democrats, they look at the bill that's coming out and they don't necessarily agree with everything that's being put into this bill. But I think there's optimism about the future with Obama, and I think that's really what's contributing to this view that the nation, at least, is moving in the right direction. Whereas when you ask the same question about California, you only get about 15% who say that.
All right, not a lot of good news out of those polls, but thank you very much, Mark, for bringing us up to date there. That's all the time that we have tonight. Be sure to visit our new website at kqed.org/thisweek, where you can watch complete episodes, comment on our stories, subscribe to our newsletter and podcasts. Also, share your thoughts about my question of the week. This week's question: is it politics or the governing structure that is paralyzing California? This weekend, there will be dancing in the streets of San Francisco. Trolley dancers will stage modern dance performances along the J Church line of Muni. All you need to see them is the $2 fare. We leave you with a glimpse of some of the delightful dances from last year. You can see more of them on our website. I'm Belva Davis. Thank you for joining us. Good night.